Getting to the heart of the matter. Back to Guy, Ben, and Frank with more Inside the News.
Welcome back to our third segment of Inside the News. Glad to have you with us. And we're going to be talking about the second wave that could possibly be coming and the election trail and what is going on there. But you know something, Ben, let's start with you. We kind of flipped up our sequence here just a little bit. But the second wave and all these protests, we've seen people out, and they were so concerned about the masks with the coronavirus back in March and April and the first part of May. But now you get the protesters out there, and they go wherever they want without the masks or whatever. We're going to be hit with something, I think, pretty severe.
Well, we'll see what happens. And of course, the left will point to reopening the economy as the cause of any blip in the numbers. And I think Republicans will point to the mass protests as being the cause behind any blip in the numbers. Look, I think the reaction, the complete denial of any issues in terms of social distancing when it comes to these protests, put a sword to the lie that, you know, social distancing is the be all and end all. And that let's think about where we were before the protests start. We were moving in a direction where people were completely vilified and ostracized for even the most mild transgression from the social distancing norms. If you went outside without a mask on, you are to be ostracized from the public. That's all gone out the window. I think that is part of why the markets have reacted so well. Not only to the jobs report, but to the fact that the whole argument, the narrative that we can only have strict social distancing in a way that hampers economic activity, that narrative has really collapsed as millions of people have taken the streets, or hundreds of thousands have taken the streets, and really ignored all of the social distancing norms that were established beforehand. So I think it's positive. We're going to see an increase in COVID-19 diagnoses because of greater testing, because of opening the economy, and because of the protests. The key is that we don't panic to that. It's a logical thing that's going to occur. And again, everyone has to keep their eyes on Sweden. They kept their economy open this entire time. They just used common sense. And this really comes down to an issue of individual responsibility and people knowing that, hey, when I go outside, I have to be smart. I can't hug and shake people's hands and do what I used to do. I have to wear a mask and just wash my hands regularly and just be smart. And we have proven, Sweden has proven, that you can knock the R naught of this thing down to a manageable level, and we can open the economy and stop committing suicide, economic suicide, which we were doing in April.
You know something, Frank, as we talk about what is going on here with a possible second wave, what is interesting in the fact that the Democrats, I hate to say it, but the top leadership, they would love that second wave. They would love the economic situation to be terrible so that it would help their cause on the left. And yet the majority of America is saying, finally, we can get out, we can go back to work. Frank and Ben and I are down here in the Sunshine State, and it's starting to feel a lot more like normal. I'm hearing that people up there in New Jersey that I've been talking to, they are deathly afraid of this second wave coming, and they're saying, well, we got to find a way out of here before it happens again, Frank.
Well, the perception that you're seeing up in the Northeast particularly is that there was never a lot of logic to the way the lockdowns occurred. You could go
Are you talking about de Blasio there?
Absolutely. If you can go into a large store, you can go into a Target, you can go into a Walmart, but you couldn't go into a mom and pop store. What's the logic to that? You could establish rules that say you could have only so many customers per square foot, but that was never the case. It was selective into who you enforce this law against and who you allowed to ignore it. We've seen the utter hypocrisy on the part of the left, which was blasting the Republicans for saying we need to open up the economy. They're saying that this was going to have a second wave of COVID spread, but they turned an utter blind eye. In fact, they seem to have approved thousands of people standing cheek by jowl to demonstrate on the streets of major cities. That apparently was okay. So the hypocrisy and the lack of any kind of consistency in how you enforced COVID regulations is starting to grate seriously on the American people. There's a second part to that. There is an illusion that you can somehow just shut the country down and keep it shut down for an extended periods of time without having consequences that will last perhaps years in the future. I'm in contact with a number of small business organizations, as I've mentioned frequently, and they are telling me that so far 20% of their members cannot reopen. They don't have the financial wherewithal to do it. That number is growing daily. A number of those small businesses are now voting with their feet. They're saying, if you want to fine me, you want to condemn me, do what you got to do. I'm opening up. The hell with the regulations that are enforced against me, but not against the protesters.
You know something, Ben? Frank hit on the point of the double standard. And yet there are businesses that were just about ready to open, and they say we're going to open the very next day. These protesters and anarchists came in, and the rioters, and they set fire to those businesses, and maybe these businesses will never open up now, Ben.
Well, there's going to be ramifications to all of this, and there's no question about it. There are businesses that have announced plans to move out of cities that have been ravaged by rioting and looting, and their impacts. And I've talked about the capitalistic wasteland that occurs, and we've seen this through history in inner cities when rioting occurs, and you discourage anyone from investing in those areas for what can be 20 years following riots. So there are long-lasting impacts. I'll state it even more. The impact of pushing our economy into a depression, and if we'd kept this economy closed for much longer, that's exactly what we would have gone into, will last essentially forever. I've run numbers that if in 1929, for instance, had the Federal Reserve reacted the way a modern Federal Reserve reacts to the crash of 1929, they did the opposite of what's done now. Back then, they shrank liquidity. They took money out of the system. That caused the Depression. If the Depression had not occurred in the 30s, the U.S. economy would be anywhere from 20 to 50% larger today than it is. And so the impact of going through a period of economic shrinkage really lasts forever. And so this is so critical that we get open, that we get people back to work, and that we be smart in terms of managing COVID-19 as opposed to the progressive view, which is to drive cases to zero. And the added benefit is that the economy is bad and Donald Trump gets kicked out of office. And that's what's driving a lot of that narrative.
That was Ben Brunson, and he's the author of the Falstaff, Enigma, and Esther, Sling. We've got Frank Vernuccio. He's in the top left of your screen there, and we're glad to be with you on all the affiliates across the country and on our YouTube channel. So if you're listening to us on radio, go to YouTube and look up WBV Inside the News. You can also hear the audio podcast on SoundCloud as well. We're going to take a time out. We're going to talk about Trump going to church. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.